The sound of that slap still rings in my head. It wasn't the kind you forget. It was the kind that burns, the kind that splits a lifetime clean in two. 1 second I was just a father trying to help. The next, I was the man the whole damn world saw kneeling on marble, a handprint burning across my face while my son's bride called me the help. If you're watching this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if it were you standing there humiliated in front of the world? Would you have walked away or let your rage do the talking? My name's Gerald Thompson, and this is the story of how one slap didn't just break my pride, it changed the course of my life, my son's and hers. Now sit back. Because before you judge me, you need to know what those hands of mine have been through and what they built long before that sound echoed through marble and glass. The glass broke before I even realized I'd dropped it. One sharp sound crystal exploding against marble cut through the laughter like a rifle shot. The music died, conversations froze. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs in shame. Every head in that grand hotel ballroom turned toward me, an old black man in a borrowed suit standing among the wreckage of champagne and gold. I looked down at my trembling hands. They were slick with bubbles and reflection hands that had once lifted engines and fed a boy now betraying me in front of his whole world. "Sir," someone whispered near the band. But before I could bend to pick up the pieces, her voice sliced through the air. "What the hell are you doing here, Vanessa Monroe, my son's bride?" The picture of Grace wrapped in silk and white light. She stared at me like I'd crawled out from under the floorboards. "You people don't touch the guests," she snapped. Her words hit harder than the sound of the breaking glass. I froze. The "you people" sank deep, the kind of insult that doesn't echo at lodges. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I just tried to—" "Don't." Her hand flew before I even saw it move. The slap landed flat across my cheek, loud enough to bounce off the chandeliers. It didn't just sting, it burned, the kind of burn that travels straight to the soul. The crowd gasped, then hushed so hard you could hear the ice melt in their glasses. For a second, nobody moved, not even me. I felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes pressing down the photographers, hesitating, unsure whether to shoot or look away. She stood there breathing fast, her perfect dress dripping champagne like golden tears down white silk. "Get this man out of here," she said. "Now." A waiter in a black vest started toward me, his eyes flicking between us confused. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. "I didn't mean to—" "Enough," she hissed. "Just go. Security." 2 big men in dark suits moved from the edge of the room. My heart started pounding, not from fear, but from something older, humiliation. I hadn't felt that in years, not since the days people crossed the street when they saw my coveralls. One of the guards reached for my arm. I stepped back on instinct, my heel catching the edge of the rug. The crowd murmured that awful murmur of rich people pretending not to watch. Then I heard a voice I'd know anywhere. "Vanessa, Marcus." My son stood at the top of the marble staircase, his glass of champagne frozen halfway to his lips. He was the picture of composure, the CEO from the magazines, tall, confident, expensive. Only his eyes gave him away. "What did you just do?" The microphone on the podium caught it, sent his words rippling through the room. Every camera turned toward him. Vanessa's face changed quick as a shutter click from fury to fear, then to performance.
"Marcus, baby," she began, voice trembling just enough for sympathy. "He ruined my dress. I don't even know who he is."
I thought he was one of the staff. Her lie hit harder than the slap. Marcus descended the steps slowly, each footstep echoing like a verdict. I could see the muscle twitch in his jaw, the way he clenched his glass so tight I thought it would shatter too. "Don't," I whispered, barely moving my lips. But he kept coming. "Dad," someone whispered from the guests' tables. The words slipped out before manners could catch it. Cameras clicked. Vanessa's eyes widened. Dad Marcus reached me, set his untouched champagne on the nearest table, and took off his tuxedo jacket. Without a word, he draped it over my shoulders. His fingers lingered just long enough for me to feel them shake. "She is not the staff," he said softly, his voice carrying through the microphone. Then louder, steady, deadly calm, "He is my father." The room gasped. Someone dropped a fork. A woman covered her mouth. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was judgment. Vanessa stepped back. "Marcus, I didn't," I thought. He didn't even look at her. "You thought wrong." For a moment I wanted to disappear to save him from the spectacle, but my body wouldn't move. I stood there, an old man under a chandelier, drowning in light and shame, feeling the heat of that slap still burning on my skin. The security guards stopped mid-step, unsure what to do. The band whispered among themselves. Every lens in that room focused on us, the billionaire son, the bride, and the father who didn't belong. Then Marcus turned to the crowd. He picked up the microphone from the podium, his voice low but clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the reception is over." He looked back at Vanessa, his eyes cold as steel. "And so is this marriage." The words dropped like thunder. Murmurs erupted, phones lifted. The orchestra's instruments screamed faint feedback as someone tripped over a cable, and through it all I stood there, my cheek still hot, my heart pounding. Marcus reached for my hand. "Come on, Dad," he said quietly. I followed him through the stunned silence past guests pretending not to stare. My shoes squeaked against the marble, the same sound as the broken glass still scattered behind us. At the door, I turned once. Vanessa was on her knees, champagne pooling around her like a golden halo, her mouth open but no sound coming out. Outside, the night air hit my face like water. The city glowed beyond the hotel doors, New York loud and bright and merciless. Marcus didn't say anything, neither did I. The limo driver opened the door, eyes wide with questions he'd never ask. Inside the car, the silence thickened. I could still hear the echo of that slap in my ear, still feel the crowd's eyes on my back. When we stopped at a red light, I saw our reflection in the glass. Him in his suit, me in his jacket, my cheek red under the city lights. He looked at me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I shook my head. "Don't be. You didn't hit me." But the truth was, the slap had hit us both. We rode on through the Manhattan night, past windows full of people who'd never know our names, past towers built by men whose fathers probably never got invited to the table. I turned my face toward the window, watched the blur of lights smear against the glass like broken stars. In that moment, I wasn't angry, just tired, bone-deep tired. The kind of tired that only comes after a lifetime of swallowing pride so your children can breathe easier. My cheek still burned, and with it memories I thought I'd buried a long time ago began to stir: the sound of engines, the smell of grease, the sight of a boy studying by a flickering lamp while his old man worked through the night. The city passed outside like a film reel I'd seen before, and the question I'd been avoiding pressed against my chest. How did we get here? The answer waited somewhere back in Alabama, under layers of dust oil, and years. Marcus stared ahead, jaw tight. I saw my own face in his, the same stubborn lines, the same quiet anger. When the car turned uptown, I finally spoke. "You don't have to fix this tonight," I said softly. He nodded once, but his voice came out cold, distant. "No, Dad, but someone's gonna have to answer for it." The way he said it made my stomach twist. I knew that tone. I'd used it myself once before. Life taught me that revenge is just pain wearing a suit. The light turned green. The car moved on. The city swallowed us whole. And as we disappeared into the night, the sound of shattering glass followed me, echoing in my mind like a ghost I couldn't shake. The smell of oil and rust never really leaves you.
Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still taste it: burnt, metal-hot asphalt, and the kind of sweat that seeps into your bones. Birmingham wasn't kind to men like me. It never had been. But back then I thought if I worked hard enough, the city would at least leave me alone. I was wrong. Before marble floors and champagne, there was red dirt and steel dust. I worked at Henderson's Auto and Diesel, a long, low shop by the railroad tracks. You could hear the trains passing every half hour, shaking the walls and raining black soot from the rafters. We fixed everything from pickup trucks to old buses, sometimes tractors, when the farmers rolled into town. I liked the noise.
It drowned out the silence of losing Evelyn. She was 45 when her lungs gave out. Spent half her life breathing the fumes from the textile plant across the river, thinking the cough was just part of getting older. By the time we found out it was cancer, it was already too late. The doctor said it was slow, but it felt fast to me, like one day she was humming in the kitchen, and the next I was feeding her soup through a straw. After she passed, I stopped listening to music altogether. The house got too quiet, and the shop was the only place where sound still meant life. Marcus was 14 then. He didn't cry at the funeral, just stood there in his black church shoes holding my hand too tight. I remember thinking how small his fingers felt. But when I looked down, they were already longer than mine. He started spending more time at the library after school, said he liked computers. I didn't understand a damn thing about computers, but I figured anything that kept him away from the streets was a blessing. I used to wait for him at the shop after hours fixing engines under the flicker of old fluorescent lights. The foreman, Chuck Whitmore, didn't like me much. He was the kind of man who called every black worker's son, no matter if they were 20 or 50. He'd strut through the shop floor in his clean shirt and gold watch, never lifting a wrench but somehow taking credit for every repair. One Friday he came around waving the weekly schedule. "Gerald, you're on night shift again. Johnson's boy gets the daytime hours now." Johnson's boy was white 19, couldn't tell a carburetor from a coffee cup. "Chuck," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "I've been on nights 3 months straight. I got a kid in school. He needs me home sometimes." He smirked. "Then tell your boy to drop football practice. The cars don't fix themselves." I felt something heavy rise up inside me, something I'd kept buried since my father taught me how to survive in this town. Keep your head down, live another day. But that night, I didn't. "I've earned my hours, same as anyone else," I told him. "You treat us like we're invisible." The shop went quiet. The only sound was the click of Chuck's gold watch. He leaned close, his breath sour with coffee and cheap whiskey. "You don't like it here, Thompson. Clock out and find another garage. Ain't like there's a shortage of you around." I remember every word because Marcus was standing by the door waiting for me. He'd come early with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He heard it all. I wanted to hit Chuck. God knows I did, but I looked at my boy and saw the fear in his eyes. So instead I picked up my wrench, finished tightening the bolts on that old Chevy, and said nothing. Chuck laughed loud and long. That's what I thought. I didn't get fired that night, not officially. That came 2 weeks later when the union rep told me they were cutting hours. What he meant was I'd talked back to the wrong man. I went home with grease still under my nails and a letter that said, "Employment terminated." Marcus found me sitting on the porch staring at that letter like it might rewrite itself. "Dad," he asked softly, "you gonna be okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, son, I'll find something. Engines always break. Somebody's gotta fix them." But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of bills, scared of losing the house Evelyn had painted yellow the summer before she got sick. That night I went through her things, her scarves, her Sunday hat, and I found an old photo tucked in a Bible verse. It was the three of us, me, her, and Marcus at the county fair. My hands were black with engine oil even then. She joked about how no soap could ever clean them. "They're not dirty," she said. "They're just proof you build things." I looked down at those same hands, rough and cracked, and wondered what they'd built now, nothing but debts and silence. For a while I did odd jobs fixing lawnmowers, patching roofs, anything to keep the lights on. Marcus started helping after school, not because I asked, but because he wanted to. I'd catch him studying under the hood of a car, reading my old manuals like they were gospel. "Computers will run cars one day," he told me, "and when they do, I'll make 'em better than any of this junk." I laughed then, but he was right. One afternoon, maybe a year later, we were walking past Henderson's. The smell of gasoline hit me like memory. Chuck was outside talking to a supplier, same gold watch glinting in the sun. He saw us, smiled that cruel smile. "Well, if it ain't Thompson and his little prodigy," he said, "teaching him how to sweep floors already." Marcus stopped walking. I felt him tense beside me, shoulders rising like a coiled spring. Before I could stop him, he said, "My dad's better than you'll ever be." Chuck's face hardened. "You better teach that boy some manners." I put my hand on Marcus's shoulder and whispered, "Let it go." Then louder, "Come on, son." We walked away. But I could feel his anger burning hotter than mine ever had. That night, while he pretended to do homework, I sat in the garage alone, turning a rusted wrench over and over in my hands. The walls smelled of oil and failure. I could still hear Chuck's voice in my head. I realized something. Then silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a man breaking so his son won't have to. I thought I was protecting him by swallowing my pride, but maybe I was teaching him something else entirely. The next morning, Marcus left early for school. On the kitchen table, he'd left a note written on the back of a library flyer. "One day, I'll buy you a garage where nobody can tell you what shift you get." I read it a dozen times, the letters shaky but fierce. And I knew deep down that boy was already building his own kind of engine, one made of anger, ambition, and love. That was the day I stopped being afraid of losing my job. I'd already lost my silence. That day I learned silence can break a man louder than any shout. They say every man's got one thing he can't let go of. For me, it was that old '67 Chevy Impala sitting in the back of our yard, half covered in rust and memory. I'd rebuilt that engine with my own hands the summer Evelyn got pregnant. Every dent had a story. Every scratch had a Sunday behind it. When times got hard, I'd go out there just to sit in the driver's seat, hand resting on the cracked steering wheel, pretending I still had control over something. But when the bills for Marcus's college came due, pretending didn't keep the lights on. I remember the day I sold it like it's tattooed on the inside of my skull. The buyer was a slick man from Montgomery with too much cologne and a smile that looked painted on. He handed me a thick envelope, thumbed through the cash like he was counting out my years. "She's got good bones," he said, meaning the car. But I knew what he was really buying: my pride. I watched him drive away in a cloud of dust, tail lights fading like the last bit of red in a dying fire. When the noise was gone, I just stood there, hands black from oil, feeling like I'd just buried an old friend. But that money meant my boy could start somewhere better. Marcus had been accepted to Auburn University engineering program. When the letter came, he'd run home waving it like the world had finally noticed him. "Dad," he said, breathless, "they want me. Me." I hugged him so tight he laughed and said I was going to crack his ribs. The problem was, tuition wasn't a dream. It was math, cold and heavy. I could barely make rent fixing lawnmowers and engines for neighbors. We didn't have credit cards or savings accounts, just a tin coffee can in the pantry labeled "rainy day," and it had been raining for years. That's when Mr. Calloway stepped in.
He was Marcus's high school physics teacher, white guy, maybe in his 50s, hair like snow and eyes that always seemed to be looking past the present. He'd grown up in the South too, but something about him had changed. Maybe teaching poor kids had made him see the cracks in the system. He called me one afternoon, said he wanted to talk about Marcus.
My first thought was, what did that boy do now? When I got to the school, Calloway was sitting behind his desk, papers everywhere, tie loose like he'd been grading for hours. He smiled when I walked in, that tired kind of smile that's half hope and half surrender. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "your son's got something rare, the kind of mind that can build bridges out of air." I didn't really know what that meant, but I nodded. He went on, "He needs to get out of Birmingham. If he stays here, this place will grind him down." "Let me help." He told me about a scholarship fund, small local, but it covered books and part of tuition. He said he'd already written Marcus a recommendation letter so strong it made the dean call him personally. When I shook his hand, he said something I never forgot. "You gave him grit. I'm just giving him a door. Marcus got that scholarship. Between that and the money from my car, we scraped together enough to send him off." I remember standing in that bus station, the smell of diesel thick in the air. His duffel bag looked too heavy for his shoulders, but he carried it like a soldier going off to war. He hugged me once hard and said, "I'll make sure you never have to fix another car again." I laughed. "Don't you worry about me. The world always needs a man who can turn a wrench." But when that bus pulled away, I cried for the first time since Evelyn died. I stood there in the rain, long after the bus disappeared, hands in my pockets feeling the oil stains still there from the Impala. Weeks turned into months. The house got quieter, cleaner, lonelier.
I worked longer hours just to fill the silence. Every paycheck went straight to tuition, food plans, dorm fees, things. I couldn't even imagine when I was his age. I didn't tell him when I skipped meals or pawned my wedding ring to cover a book fee. Some truths are too heavy to hand to your child. He called on Sundays, always from some library or lab.
"Dad, you wouldn't believe what we're building," he'd say, voice full of light. Circuits, algorithms, codes, words that meant nothing to me but everything to him. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch after hanging up, holding the phone like it still carried his warmth. The crickets would sing, the air would smell of oil and honeysuckle, and I'd think, maybe this is what Evelyn wanted to see our boy shine brighter than the life we had. One Christmas he came home, taller, sharper. His hands were clean now, smooth, no grease under the nails. When he hugged me, I felt that difference, the way city life had already started scrubbing the dirt off him. He brought a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a set of car keys. "They're yours," he said proudly. "I bought you a used truck, so you can stop walking to work." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The keys gleamed under the kitchen light, and all I could see was the reflection of my old Impala, the one I sold so he could have this life. I didn't tell him that, just smiled and said, "It's beautiful, son." That night after he went to bed, I walked out to the truck, ran my fingers along the hood. It wasn't much, but it ran smooth, quiet. I turned the ignition just to hear the engine hum. For a second I imagined the Impala again, the weight of the wrench in my hand, the sound of her old heart beating. The next morning, Marcus found me sitting on the porch, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug I'd had since he was a boy. He looked at my hands, the cracks and calluses. "You should take it easy, Dad," he said. "Those hands been through enough." I smiled. "They're tougher than they look." But later, when he left for another semester, I stared at those hands. The skin was darker now, tougher, scarred in the shape of old tools. And I realized something: these weren't hands that built machines anymore. They'd built a man made of light. Still, I never told him about the car or the ring or the nights I went hungry. Some debts don't need receipts. They live under your skin in the quiet places only a father knows. And every time I wiped grease from my palms, I felt that secret beating under them, the price of his future paid in full by my dirty, oil-stained hands. The first time I saw New York, I thought I'd stepped into someone else's dream. Everything shined, too much windows, cars, even the damn sidewalks. The air hummed with money. I could smell it on people's coats and the perfume they wore just to go buy groceries. Marcus had sent a driver for me, a young brother in a black suit who kept calling me sir like I was somebody important. The car ride from the airport felt like time travel. Steel towers instead of pines, glass instead of sky. When we pulled up in front of Marcus's building, I didn't even want to get out. It wasn't a building. It was a monument. Polished stone doorman and gloves, elevators that whispered instead of clanked. "Welcome home, Dad," Marcus said, smiling like he finally got to give something back. I smiled too, but inside I felt smaller than I ever had. The place was too clean, too big, the kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's distance. The penthouse stretched across 2 floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Central Park like a painting that wouldn't stop staring back. The floors were marble white, cold, shining. I was scared to walk on them, afraid I'd leave footprints that wouldn't come off. I tried to help. That's just how I'm built. The first morning I woke up before the sun made coffee and started wiping down the kitchen counters. The maid, her name was Rosa, walked in and froze like I'd stolen her job. "Mr. Thompson, please," she said, eyes wide. "You don't have to do that." I laughed. "Ma'am, I've been doing this since before you were born." My hands don't know how to sit still, but she looked nervous, like my touching the counter messed up some invisible rule of rich folks living. I backed off, sat down, stared at the coffee machine that cost more than my old house. Later that day, Marcus left for work meetings, investors, television interviews. "Rest, Dad," he said. "Enjoy the view." I nodded, but rest was never something I knew how to do. By noon, I was dusting the windowsills. By 1, I was vacuuming. The housekeeper came back and caught me on my knees, cleaning a scuff mark from the marble. "Please," she said again, voice tight. That's not your job. I smiled, embarrassed. Then what is? That's when Vanessa walked in. She wasn't what I expected. Tall, sharp, every move calculated like she'd practiced in front of a mirror. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of someone who's never been told no. "Oh," she said, spotting me by the floor, "you must be the famous Mr. Thompson." I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans. "Just Gerald's fine, ma'am." She smiled, sweet but not kind. "Gerald, then. You're not what I pictured." "Guess life's full of surprises," I said, half laughing. She looked around the spotless kitchen, then back at me. "You speak so well for your background." The words slid out like honey, laced with glass. I'd heard worse in Alabama, but never said with such grace. I nodded, pretending it didn't cut. My mama made sure I did. Marcus came home early that evening, happy as a man could be. "Vanessa's cooking dinner," he said proudly. "You'll love her pasta." She poured the wine herself, all charm and sparkle. Her friends from the art world came, two thin people with soft hands and loud opinions. They talked about galleries and hedge funds, about curating life. I didn't say much. I didn't know what half of it meant. When dinner started, I picked up the nearest fork and got to work. That's when it happened, quiet, but sharp enough to draw blood. Vanessa laughed lightly. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," she said, "that's not the salad fork." The table laughed, too small, polite chuckles, the kind that hurt worse than open mockery. I froze for half a second, looked down at the dozen silver pieces lined up like an exam I hadn't studied for. "Guess I failed the test," I said softly. Marcus smiled awkwardly, thinking it was just teasing. "He's still learning the New York ways," he joked. Vanessa's eyes met mine. "Oh, I'm sure he is." The words were nothing and yet everything. Her tone said it all. "You don't belong here, old man." I put the fork down, careful, slow. My appetite vanished. I could feel Rosa's eyes on me from the kitchen doorway, pity and apology mixed together. I forced a laugh. "Back home, we just use one fork for everything. Saves on dishes." The table tittered again. I smiled like it didn't matter. But inside it was the old feeling, the kind I'd carried since the day Chuck Whitmore told me I'd never be anything but help. When dinner was over, Marcus and his friends moved to the balcony for drinks. Vanessa kissed his cheek, her laughter soft and deliberate. She was perfect in the way a diamond is perfect, cold, flawless, unyielding. I stayed behind, helping Rosa clear plates. She tried to take them from my hands, but I held on. "It's fine," I said. "I need to feel useful." She nodded quietly. "You are," she whispered. Later, when the apartment went quiet, I walked out onto the balcony. The city pulsed beneath me like a living thing, horns, sirens, the glow of endless windows. Marcus's world. He joined me, a moment later, slipped his arm around my shoulder. "You okay, Dad?" I looked at him, handsome, powerful, smiling, like he'd fixed every broken thing in our lives. "Yeah," I said, "just not used to all this shine." He laughed. "You'll get used to it." Maybe he believed that. I didn't. Some lights aren't meant for men like me. They blind more than they warm. Behind the glass, I saw Vanessa watching us, her smile fading as soon as Marcus turned his back. There was calculation in her eyes, something cold and assessing, like a jeweler deciding if a stone's worth keeping. I turned away before she caught me looking. The marble floor gleamed under the city lights, white and perfect, untouched by dirt or dust or history. I could see my reflection in it, an old mechanic standing in a palace built by his son. And for the first time, I wondered if Marcus had built something too big for either of us to stand on without cracking it. The night stretched long and quiet. Tomorrow there'd be another dinner, another test, another chance for me to fail at being the kind of father this new world understood. But I promised myself one thing before heading to bed: next time I'd use the right damn fork. I've sat at a lot of tables in my life: cafeteria. Tables, break room tables, greasy diner booths where the ketchup bottles stuck to your hand if you weren't careful. But nothing prepared me for that dining table in Marcus's penthouse. It was 12 feet of polished walnut surrounded by people who looked like they'd never eaten anything that came from a paper box. Vanessa called it a casual dinner with friends, but nothing about it was casual. The napkins were folded into swans.
There were 3 forks again, one big one, medium, one small, and a knife sharp enough to cut through pride.
I promised myself I wouldn't embarrass Marcus this time. The first mistake happened before the soup even hit the table. The waiter came around asking for drink orders. I saw someone say, Cabernet, another Sauvignon Blanc. I didn't want to sound foolish, so I just pointed to the first glass of red wine he poured and said, I'll have what she's having. Apparently she was drinking some rare French Bordeaux that cost more than my first pickup truck. Vanessa's friends smiled at each other, that little curl of amusement people try to hide, but never do. That's adorable, Gerald, Vanessa said, resting her manicured fingers on her wine stem. So southern of you, the table laughed softly. Not cruel, not loud, but enough. I smiled back polite. Well, down south we drink whatever's poured long as it's wet. Laughter again. This time warmer, more comfortable. Vanessa tilted her head, studied me like I was part of the entertainment. Marcus, sitting beside her, chuckled. He's full of sayings like that, he said proudly. Grew up with wisdom in a toolbox. I appreciated the gesture, but it just made her eyes flick toward me, curious and calculating. Across the table was a man named Elliot Shaw, one of Vanessa's friends from Columbia Law. He was young, probably early 30s, smooth as silk and twice as smug. Expensive watch, expensive teeth, expensive opinions. So Gerald, he said, swirling his wine like he was auditioning for a commercial. Marcus told us you were a mechanic back in Alabama. Still am, I said, just without the customers. He smiled. That's wonderful. I love stories like that. You know, hard work, grit, the American dream. He turned to the others. It's inspiring, isn't it? That kind of upward mobility. Someone murmured agreement. Someone else said absolutely. Elliot kept going. My dad always said America's built on opportunity. Of course, he chuckled, some of us get lucky breaks too, like affirmative action, scholarships, diversity programs. Helps level the field right. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Vanessa gave him a warning glance, but only half-hearted. Marcus didn't catch the tone he was talking to the guest beside him about the company's next funding round. I set my fork down slowly. Where I come from, I said the only affirmative action was showing up on time and not dying before payday. The table went quiet for half a breath, then Vanessa laughed too loud, too bright. Oh, Elliot, don't start politics tonight. Elliot raised his hands, just making conversation. Gerald's got great humor. I smiled the same way you smile when a dog bares its teeth. Sure I do. The rest of dinner passed like walking through broken glass barefoot. The food was good, I think. I can't even remember what I ate. Probably something with a French name that cost too much, but the laughter felt sharp. And every polite smile was another mask I had to look through. Halfway through dessert, Marcus stood to take a business call. I'll be 2 minutes, he said, kissing Vanessa's head before stepping out to the balcony. The second he was gone, the table loosened like a belt after a big meal. Conversations turned more open, a little meaner. Elliot leaned back in his chair, smirked at me. You must be proud, Gerald, raising a son who made it out. That's rare. I took a sip of that overpriced wine just to have something to do with my hands. Proud's one word for it. Blessed is another. He nodded, eyes glinting. Still, it must be strange, your son building apps for people who'll never touch an engine in their lives. Different worlds, huh? Before I could answer, Vanessa cut in. Elliot. Don't tease, she said. Marcus loves his father. Gerald's part of the family. It should have sounded comforting. But the way she said part of the family, like she was including the housekeeper and the driver, made me want to get up and leave. When Marcus came back, I was already pushing my chair away. Long day, I said. Mind if I turn in early? Of course, Vanessa said sweetly. Rosa will show you to your room. I didn't need showing. I'd memorized every hallway in that place because I didn't want to look lost. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The marble floor in my room gleamed under the city light like a frozen lake. I went out to the balcony for air. Through the glass door, I saw them still sitting at the table. Vanessa laughing, Elliot leaning close to her, whispering something that made her glance toward the hallway I'd just left. She laughed again, but quieter this time, smaller, meaner. Then I saw Marcus return, pouring himself another drink. Elliot turned to him, still smiling, and said something I barely caught through the glass. But I read his lips clear as day. He's a charity case with oil on his hands. Marcus froze. The smile died on his face. He didn't say a word, just looked at Elliot for a long, dangerous second before setting his glass down slow. I stepped back into the shadows before he saw me. The night swallowed the sound of my breath. Inside, the laughter kept going, but it felt different now, thinner, strained, like a song that had just gone off key. I stared out at the skyline, that sea of light Marcus had built his life on, and for the first time I saw how lonely it looked from up high. The wedding was a week away. I told myself the storm would pass, but deep down I knew better. Marcus might have stayed silent at that table, but I saw it in his eyes, the same anger I once buried back in Alabama. An anger like that doesn't stay buried for long. The morning of the wedding felt like something out of a dream, too bright, too perfect, the kind of day that warns you trouble's hiding underneath. The museum was a cathedral of glass and stone, full of echoes and soft violin music that made everything sound expensive. There were orchids hanging from the ceiling, champagne towers that shimmered like sunlight, and people who wore wealth the way I used to wear Greece second nature. Marcus looked good, sharp, calm. He'd made it. Every guest there said it at least once, how he'd gone from nothing to everything. I stood at the back, proud but small, in a rented suit that didn't quite fit. My shoes pinched. My tie felt like a noose, but I didn't mind. This was his day, not mine. I kept to the edges, nodding when people looked at me, smiling when they didn't. Vanessa's family filled the front rows, old money, all pearls and perfect posture. The kind of people who think history only started once their names appeared in it. When the ceremony ended and the reception began, the air shifted. The champagne started flowing like a river, and laughter bounced off the marble walls. A string quartet played near the sculpture garden. Marcus and Vanessa stood in a sea of photographers, perfect smiles catching flash after flash. I stayed by the caterer's station where it was quieter. That's when I noticed the kid, no more than 19, maybe 20. Young black man in a white shirt, 2 sizes too big, balancing a tray stacked high with champagne flutes. His hands shook with every step. I knew that look, trying too hard not to mess up, praying nobody noticed the fear. He stumbled on a patch of carpet, the tray tilting. Instinct took over. "Hey, easy there, son," I said, reaching out to steady him. My hand caught the edge of the tray just enough to keep it from crashing. He looked at me, wide-eyed, grateful. "Thanks, sir. These things are heavier than they look." "Tell me about it." I chuckled. "I've carried heavier." Then my heel caught the corner of that same damn rug. The world went slow. The tray tipped. Glasses slid like falling stars, catching the light as they fell, and then came the sound. Crash! A dozen champagne flutes shattered across the floor, the golden liquid arcing through the air like a halo before splattering across the white silk of Vanessa's wedding gown. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Vanessa stared down at herself, the champagne soaked into the fabric, spreading like a stain of sunlight gone bad. Then she looked up at me, her face twisted. "What the hell did you do?" I'm sorry," I stammered. He was about to drop. "I just tried to—" "You," she hissed, her voice slicing through the music. "You clumsy god, do you even belong here? Who let you near the guests?" I froze. The kid disappeared behind me, backing away like smoke. "Ma'am, I didn't mean—" The slap came out of nowhere, sharp, fast, humiliating. The sound echoed off the marble, off the walls, off the eyes of every person in that room. My head jerked sideways, my cheek burned, the whole place went silent. "Get him out of here," she shouted, shaking her voice high and brittle. "Get the staff out before they ruin anything else." "Staff?" The word hit harder than the slap. 2 security guards appeared from nowhere, moving fast, professional, efficient. One grabbed my arm. I could feel the pressure on my shoulder, the same grip I'd felt years ago when factory cops pulled me from a protest line. I said, "I'm sorry," I murmured, dazed. "I'm not." She pointed toward the door. "Out, now, before he breaks something else." The guards started to move me. I didn't fight. What was there to fight for? My hands hung limp at my sides, trembling. Then a voice cut through the silence like thunder. "Vanessa." Marcus stood at the edge of the stage, microphone still in hand. His face was pale, but his eyes were pure fire. What he said slowly, "Did you just do?" Vanessa turned toward him, panic flashing across her face before she caught herself. She forced a laugh. "Marcus, baby, he's one of the servers. He spilled champagne all over me. Just get him out of here." Before Marcus's voice boomed through the speakers. "He's not the staff." The crowd shifted, a ripple of confusion. "He's my father." The words landed heavy and final. You could hear every breath stop at once. Cameras froze mid-flash. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Vanessa went white. "Marcus, I didn't know." "Yes," he said, stepping down from the stage. "You did." He walked past her, took off his tuxedo jacket and laid it over my shoulders. His hand lingered there just long enough for everyone to see. The security guards dropped their grips, unsure what to do. The silence was suffocating, the kind that holds its breath before an explosion. Marcus turned to the microphone again.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he said evenly, "thank you for coming. The reception is over." He looked back at Vanessa, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "And so is this marriage," someone gasped. Phones went up. The moment burned itself into every screen in the room. Vanessa took a step toward him. "Marcus, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly." He took my arm gently. "Come on, Dad." As we walked toward the exit, flashes went off like lightning. People whispered. Someone cried. The quartet stopped playing mid-note, their bows frozen in the air. At the door, I turned back once. Vanessa stood in the center of the marble floor, her perfect gown ruined, her perfect world cracking. The young waiter stood behind a pillar, watching, guilt written all over his face. Outside, the evening air was sharp and clean. The sound of the city felt almost merciful after the suffocating silence of that hall. Marcus's jaw was tight. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I've been hit harder by better people." He almost smiled at that, but his eyes stayed cold. By the time we reached the car, I could already hear the distant buzz of phones, the hum of the world catching scent of blood. Cameras, headlines, hashtags. The video would spread before we even made it home. The slap, the silence. Marcus's words. It had everything the world loved. Money, scandal, justice served on marble. But for me, standing there under the Manhattan streetlights, it didn't feel like justice. It felt like a wound reopened for everyone to see. Marcus opened the door for me. I hesitated. "Son," I said softly, "this ain't gonna end easy." He looked at me, eyes burning. "Maybe not, Dad, but it's gonna end right." The city lights flickered across his face, bright, hard, unflinching. And as we drove away, sirens echoing in the distance, I knew this was only the beginning. Some things break loud enough for the whole world to hear. It took less than 12 hours for the world to find us. By morning, the slap wasn't just a memory, it was a headline. Every screen I walked past glowed with our faces, mine shocked and still. Vanessa's frozen mid-swing, Marcus's jaw-tight eyes full of fire. They called it the wedding slap. Justice. For Gerald trended by noon. By evening, everyone from morning talk shows to political podcasts had an opinion. Some called me the father who stood with dignity. Others said I was a symbol of old wounds still bleeding. They analyzed every second of that video like it was a national event. Slow-motion replays, frame-by-frame breakdowns, whole news panels arguing whether the slap was just anger or a racist reflex. The world decided it was the second one,
People dug into Vanessa's past, her tweets, her interviews, the magazine quotes where she talked about refining culture. It didn't take long before refining started sounding a lot like excluding. Brands cut ties. Fashion houses canceled partnerships. The family's PR team tried to spin it, saying she was under emotional stress. It only made things worse. Meanwhile, I didn't say a word. Marcus begged me to give a statement. "Just once, Dad," he said. "Tell them what happened. They'll listen to you." But what could I say? That a rich girl slapped an old mechanic and suddenly the world cared, that people had been throwing invisible slaps at me my whole life. Just quieter ones dressed in smiles, so I stayed silent. And somehow silence made me famous. News anchors called it dignity in silence. Journalists camped outside our building. Cameras followed me when I went to the grocery store. People stopped me in the street. Black folks, white folks, everyone. "You handled yourself like a king, Mr. Thompson. You're an inspiration." I didn't feel like a king, I just felt tired. But Marcus, he wasn't tired. He was angry. He started talking loud and clear. Every interview, every press conference, he called out Vanessa, her family, the media, the industry. "We still judge people by the dirt under their nails," he said on CNBC. "My father built me with those hands. Don't you dare call them dirty." The crowd loved him for it. Investors didn't. Within 2 weeks, his company's stock dropped 15%. Major partners pulled out, claiming brand instability. One board member even said Marcus had weaponized race for sympathy. Then came the lawsuit. Vanessa's family filed for defamation and emotional distress. Claimed Marcus had orchestrated a public spectacle for financial gain. Their lawyers, big ones, the kind that bill 5 figures an hour, said I'd intentionally provoke the incident for attention. When I read the court summons, I laughed once, dry and bitter. "Son," I said, "they really think I plan to get slapped." Marcus didn't laugh. "They're coming after the company, Dad. They want to bury us in paperwork until we run out of breath." And they did. Every morning brought new headlines, new depositions, new vultures circling. The internet that once loved us turned restless. Some said we were milking the moment. Others said Marcus was too emotional for a CEO. The tide that lifts you can drown you just as fast. One night, a producer from a talk show called Morning Window came knocking. "We'd love to have you on," she said. "Tell your side. Help the world heal." I almost slammed the door, but something in her eyes made me pause. "Why?" I asked. "Because people need hope, Mr. Thompson." Hope. Funny word. I'd spent 60 years trying to hold on to it, and now strangers wanted to buy it from me. So I went. Sat under the bright studio lights, my hands folded in my lap, the host smiling like a preacher who'd found a sermon. "Mr. Thompson," she said gently, "why didn't you hit her back?" I looked at her, then the cameras, then the floor. "Because I've been hit before," I said, "and hitting back never fixed a thing. Sometimes the only power you got left is not giving folks the satisfaction of watching you break." The audience went quiet. Some clapped, some cried. Someone online clipped it, and within hours it was everywhere again. That night, Marcus hugged me for the first time in months. "You saved us, Dad," but I wasn't sure. A week later, the court date arrived. The courthouse buzzed with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. I wore the same suit from the wedding, cleaned and pressed, though the stain of that night never really washed out. Inside, Vanessa sat across the aisle. She looked different, thinner, paler, her perfect hair pulled back too tight. Her eyes, those eyes that once looked down on me, were red-rimmed but still sharp. When she saw me enter, she whispered something to her lawyer. Then she turned, met my gaze, and smiled a cold, brittle smile. During the opening statements, her attorney painted a picture straight from fiction. Gerald Thompson intentionally inserted himself into a high-profile wedding for attention, causing chaos and reputational harm. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "That's a damn lie," the judge warned him to keep order. Then Vanessa's lawyer gestured toward me, and Mr. Thompson, this humble mechanic turned viral icon, profited from his newfound fame. Interviews, sponsorships, paid appearances. My jaw clenched. I never took a dime. He smirked. "We'll see." I glanced at Marcus. His knuckles were white, his jaw tight. He looked like me the day I lost my job at the garage, rage trembling under control. As the lawyer droned on, Vanessa sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, expression soft, almost saintly. Every time the cameras turned her way, she dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The performance was perfect. Then the lawyer's voice cut through again. "Your Honor, we will prove this entire incident was not an accident, but a calculated act by Mr. Thompson and his son to gain sympathy and financial advantage." The courtroom murmured. I felt the air thicken around me. Vanessa's gaze met mine again, calm, confident, and in that look I saw it her plan wasn't to win money, it was to take back her dignity by stripping mine. For the first time since that slap, I felt anger bloom hot in my chest. But I didn't speak. Not yet. The judge called for a recess. Reporters rushed toward the hallway, microphones ready. Marcus whispered, "We'll destroy them in cross-examination." Maybe. But as I watched Vanessa glide out of the courtroom, head-high camera lights following her like she still belonged on magazine covers, I realized something. She wasn't done fighting, and this war wasn't about money anymore. It was about narrative, and whoever told the story better won. Courtrooms always smell the same, like old paper and nervous sweat. Doesn't matter if it's Birmingham or Manhattan, justice still wears the same heavy perfume of fear. The day of my testimony, the air inside that room felt thick enough to choke on. Reporters packed every bench. The world was watching again, hungry for a verdict, or maybe just a spectacle. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table in a cream suit, the picture of calm redemption. Her lawyers spoke in polished tones about character assassination and engineered scandal. They called it the stage theory. According to them, Marcus had planned the entire wedding disaster as a public morality stunt, a perfect viral story to make his company look good. It was so ridiculous I almost laughed. But when you've been poor long enough, you learn the rich don't need truth. They just need doubt. Marcus sat beside his attorney, jaw tight, eyes dark. I could tell he wanted to stand up and shout, but he didn't. He was his father's son. He'd learned that silence held long enough can sound louder than rage. Then the judge called my name. I stood. My knees ached. My heart thudded like an old engine trying to turn over. The clerk swore me in, and I took the witness chair. Vanessa's lawyer started soft. "Mr. Thompson, you were present at the Lawrence Museum on April 17th, correct?" "Yes, sir. And you were aware the event was being filmed?" "I knew there were cameras," I said. "Didn't think they were for me." A few people chuckled quietly. The judge glared them down. The lawyer stepped closer. "Isn't it true, Mr. Thompson, that you had prior knowledge of Marcus's marketing campaign, one that focused on themes of humility, forgiveness, and social class?" I frowned. "You think my son needed his mama's death?" My calloused hands and a slap to sell an app. He blinked, thrown off. "Sir, please just answer the question." "My answer's yes," I said evenly. "He's humble. Because he watched me be humiliated his whole life and never saw me stop working." The lawyer's face tightened. "Mr. Thompson, did Marcus ever discuss with you the idea of, shall we say, a story that would move people?" I leaned forward a little. "Every parent wants their kid to move people, but not like that, not through pain." He sighed, flipping through papers. "Mr. Thompson, you've become something of a celebrity since the wedding. Interviews, appearances, I cut him off. Every interview I gave, I turned down the money. Every one. I don't take cash for dignity." The room went quiet. You could hear the rustle of someone's notebook in the back row. The lawyer tried again, his tone sharper now. "So you expect this court to believe the entire thing was an accident?" I looked straight at Vanessa. Her eyes didn't move. "I fixed engines my whole life, ma'am," I said, voice steady. "I know what it means to hold something broken and try to make it run again." But that night, I paused, breath trembling. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just trying to help. No one spoke. The silence stretched heavy and human. Then Marcus's lawyer, a young woman named Priya Desai, stood for cross-examination. She moved like she already knew the truth was on her side. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "you said you didn't know the wedding was being filmed." "That's right." So this clip she turned toward the screen was not part of any planned production. The lights dimmed, the courtroom screen flickered to life. There it was again, that moment, the tray falling, the splash of gold champagne, the sound that still haunted me, but this time it kept playing, longer, uncut. You could hear everything. Vanessa's voice, sharp, clear, unmistakable. "Do you even belong here? Who let you near the guests?" And then the slap. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like wind through tall grass. The judge leaned forward. Vanessa's attorney froze his mouth half open. Priya didn't smile, but her eyes glimmered with quiet fire. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge cleared his throat. "We'll adjourn for a short recess." As I stood to step down, Vanessa's composure cracked. She whispered something to her lawyer, but the microphones caught it barely audible trembling. It wasn't supposed to sound like that. When I turned, she was crying. Not the kind of tears that beg for sympathy, real ones. Heavy, silent, falling down the face of a woman who finally saw the hole she'd dug. Outside, the reporters shouted my name, Marcus's name, her name. Inside, the gavel fell. The judge's ruling came 2 days later. Case dismissed. No damages, no defamation. The truth was simple enough to fit in one sentence. She had struck me, and the world had seen it. When the verdict was read, Marcus's shoulders finally dropped, the first real breath he'd taken in months. People clapped in the hallway. Lawyers congratulated each other. Cameras flashed like fireworks. But I didn't celebrate, because when I looked across that courtroom, I saw Vanessa sitting alone. Her makeup streaked her eyes empty, her world gone. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I thought of that boy at the wedding, the one with shaking hands, and how close he'd been to being me 50 years ago. And I realized this was never about vengeance. It was about balance. About the universe finally setting the scale right for once. I stood, nodded to the judge, and walked past Vanessa without a word. As I reached the door, I heard her whisper behind me, soft and breaking, "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry." I didn't stop, didn't turn. Forgiveness would come when it was ready, but not today. Outside, cameras flashed, people cheered, microphones shoved toward my face. "Mr. Thompson, how does it feel to win?" I paused at the courthouse steps. The air smelled like rain. "I didn't win," I said quietly. The truth did, and I kept walking, the sound of marble floors still echoing somewhere far behind me. It's strange how quiet life gets after the noise dies down. Months passed and the world moved on to its next scandal, its next slap. But I stayed right where I was, back in the rhythm of small things. Every Tuesday and Thursday I took the Q train down to Brooklyn, to the old brick church on Fulton Street. The sign out front said, "St. Mary's Kitchen, hot meals, open hearts." That's where I worked, no salary, no spotlight, just a hairnet, a pot of soup, and a line of people who reminded me of home. The place smelled of broth and onions, of time and mercy. We served anyone who showed up, addicts, runaways, veterans, mothers clutching babies. People who'd fallen through the cracks so many others pretended didn't exist. It felt good to do something simple again. No cameras, no marble floors, just hunger and kindness meeting halfway. One cold afternoon, the sky bruised with snow, the line stretched around the corner. I was ladling soup, lost in thought, when I felt the room change the way it does when a storm walks through a doorway. I looked up. There she was, Vanessa. At first I didn't believe it. The woman standing there wasn't the one from the wedding photos or the courtroom sketches. Her hair was pulled back into a dull, uneven ponytail. No makeup, no gloss. Her coat, cheap frayed at the sleeves, looked 2 sizes too big. She was thinner, hollow-eyed, pale, the kind of pale that comes from regret, not winter. She froze when she saw me. The whole line seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took one small step forward. "Mr. Thompson," her voice cracked. I didn't know you worked here." I nodded once. "Every week." She looked down, fingers twisting together. "I come when I can't find work. I'm staying with my cousin in the Bronx. It's not." She stopped. "I'm sorry." The words fell out like broken glass, painful, sharp, but real. I didn't answer right away. I just turned, dipped the ladle into the pot, and filled a bowl with steaming soup. The smell of garlic and thyme filled the air. I added a slice of bread still warm from the oven. Then I walked around the counter, slow, careful, and placed it into her trembling hands. "You look hungry," I said softly. "Eat. The world's already punished you enough." She stared at the bowl for a long time. Then the tears came quiet, shaking the kind that don't ask for pity. She tried to speak, but I shook my head. "No need," I said. "Just eat." She nodded, clutching the bowl like it was the last warm thing she had left. I turned back to the stove, stirred the pot, kept serving. A minute later, I heard the sound of her spoon against the bowl, small, steady, human. That was enough. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her redemption. I just needed to know she'd live through it. Because I'd learned something standing in that kitchen with soup on my hands instead of grease. Forgiveness isn't saying it's okay. It's saying I won't let your sin own me anymore. The world outside could argue about guilt and justice. But in that room, all that mattered was hunger and mercy. The next few people in line stepped forward, grateful, tired, carrying their own ghosts. I handed out bowls one by one. When the rush slowed, I looked up again and saw a shadow in the doorway. Marcus. He stood there framed by the cold light from outside, watching quietly. He'd just come back from some tech summit in California, still in his tailored coat. But his eyes weren't on the room. They were on her. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there as Vanessa finished her soup, wiped her eyes, and set the empty bowl on the table. She turned toward the door, saw him, and froze. Their eyes met, brief, heavy, full of things that used to be. She tried to speak, but he shook his head once. Not in anger, just finality. She lowered her gaze, slipped past him, and disappeared into the snow. Marcus stepped forward, silent. I poured him a cup of coffee, black, just how he liked it. He took it, nodded toward the empty seat Vanessa had left. That was her, wasn't it? Yeah. She looked different. "Life'll do that to a person," I said. He didn't reply. He just stood there watching the steam rise from his cup. After a moment, he said quietly, "You forgave her." I smiled faintly. Didn't have to. Life already did the work. Marcus looked at me, eyes soft, tired, in the way men get when they've finally learned what power can't fix. "Dad," he said, "how do you do that? Still give to people who took from you?" I stirred the pot, tasting the broth. "Same way I fix engines. Doesn't matter who broke it, if it's in front of you, you try to make it run again." He nodded slowly. And for the first time in a long while, I saw peace settle on his face. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless. Inside, the kitchen smelled of bread warmth and second chances. And for the first time since the wedding, the world felt balanced again. The nights in New York had started to grow quieter again. It had been nearly a year since the trial, and the world had already found new storms to chase. But for me and Marcus, the noise had finally settled into something like peace. We were sitting out on the balcony that night, the city stretched beneath us like an electric ocean. The hum of traffic rose and fell, steady as a heartbeat. From somewhere below, a saxophone player on the corner was working his soul into Ain't No Sunshine. Marcus leaned back in his chair, sleeves rolled up, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He'd cut back on the interviews, started spending more time here, home with me. His face had changed. Softer around the edges, like the fight had burned through him but left behind something gentler. He looked out over the skyline. "It's funny," he said, his voice low, thoughtful. "When I was a kid, I used to dream about this, about being up high enough that I'd never have to look up to anyone again. And now I asked." He smiled a little. "Now it just looks like a lot of windows full of tired people." I chuckled, slow and deep. "That's the truth. Money just buys you a higher view of the same problems." He nodded, quiet for a long time. The wind carried in the faint sound of a radio from another balcony, a preacher's voice talking about forgiveness, about how dignity ain't silence but knowing when not to speak. I smiled. Maybe God had a sense of humor after all. Marcus set his glass down, turned to me. "You ever think about those days back in Birmingham, the shop, the noise, the smell of oil?" "Every damn day," I said. "It's still under my nails even now."
He studied my hands, rough, scarred brown as old oak. Those hands built everything, he said quietly. You built me with them. I looked down at them too, the cracks, the veins, the places where time had left its mark. I rubbed my thumb across one old burn scar from an engine belt that slipped 30 years ago. Funny thing, pain fades, but memory don't. These hands, I said, my voice soft but steady, fixed cars, raised a son, and held on when life tried to break me. That's all the wealth I ever needed. Marcus didn't say anything. He just reached over, took my hands in his, the same way I used to when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. For a second, the years folded up between us, and it was just father and son again, nothing else. The radio preacher kept talking, his voice drifting in the night. Forgiveness ain't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering who you are despite it. I closed my eyes. Let the wind carry it through me. A few minutes later, Marcus's phone buzzed on the table. He almost ignored it, but then he frowned and picked it up. Huh, he said. What is it? He turned the screen toward me. It was an email from someone named Deshaun Miller. I squinted. Who's that? Marcus smiled slowly. You remember that young waiter at the wedding, the one you helped with the champagne tray? Yeah, I said, the memory sharp and bittersweet. Poor kid looked like he was carrying the world on that tray. Marcus nodded. That's him. He tracked me down through the foundation. He started reading the email aloud. Mr. Thompson, I don't know if you remember me, but I'll never forget you. That night changed my life in ways I didn't understand till later. Watching how your father carried himself, that kind of grace, it made me want to be better. I saved up, got a loan, and opened my own garage in the Bronx. I named it Thompson Hands Garage. Because those hands fixed more than engines, they fixed how I saw myself. Thank you. Marcus's voice broke a little at the end. He set the phone down, exhaled. I laughed softly, shaking my head. That boy didn't need to do that. Marcus smiled. Maybe he just wanted you to know what you built kept running. We sat there a while longer, the city breathing around us, the stars faint but steady above the haze. I thought about Evelyn, about the Impala I sold, about every piece of my life that had been traded for something I couldn't see back then. And suddenly it all made sense. Some men build engines, some build empires, but the lucky ones, they build legacies that outlive both. I reached for my coffee mug, raised it toward the skyline. To good hands, I said. Marcus lifted his glass. To the hands that built light. The wind carried our laughter off the balcony down into the streets below. Somewhere far away, the radio faded into a gospel song about mercy and second chances. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt that the city wasn't closing in on me anymore. It was breathing with me. Because even after everything, after the noise, the hurt, the marble floors, and the broken glass, these hands still remembered how to hold something good. You know, people still stop me on the street. They say, Mr. Thompson, you must feel proud. You got justice. But the truth is, justice ain't what you think it is. It's quieter, heavier. That slap, it stopped the room, sure. But what healed me wasn't the noise. It was the silence that came after. The moment I chose not to hate. These hands of mine, they fixed cars, raised a son, and held on when life tried to tear everything apart. I don't need revenge. I already won the day I didn't swing back. If you're still here listening, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what your hands have built or what they've had to let go of. Because one day, all that'll be left of us are the things we built with love strong enough to outlast pain.